My son gave me leftovers and said, "That's all that's left. My name is Margaret Turner, but people call me Maggie." And this is the story of how a single moment at the dinner table broke me more than any hardship I had endured in 64 years of life. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. The plate was set before me without care, its porcelain chipped at the rim, the food cold and uninviting. Scraps of chicken clung to the bone, a spoonful of mashed potatoes hardened into a gray lump, and a half-wilted salad leaf stared back at me as if mocking my place at this table. My son's hand retreated almost as quickly as it appeared, his voice casual, dismissive, as though what he was offering held no weight at all. "That's all that's left, Mom." His tone carried no apology, no warmth, just a statement of fact, before his attention drifted back toward his wife and daughter who sat across from him, still smiling, still eating, still surrounded by plates, full of flavor and care. I looked at the food in front of me, but what I saw was not just leftovers. What I saw was my life condensed into one cruel offering. Years of sacrifice, of staying awake through nights grading papers to buy him shoes, of sewing his jackets again and again, so he wouldn't freeze, of whispering to him that I wasn't hungry, so he could eat more. Those years all collapsed into that plate of scraps. He didn't notice the silence stretching between his words and my breath. He didn't notice the tremor in my hands as I pulled the plate closer. To him, it was nothing. To me, it was everything. The table glowed with warmth, laughter, and the scent of roasted chicken. My daughter-in-law, Rebecca, had made sure every dish was arranged with perfection, glazed carrots gleaming with butter bread warm enough to release curls of steam, wine glasses filled to the brim, catching the light like jewels. Their voices rose and fell with easy chatter, Lily's giggles spilling like music into the room, Daniel's laugh echoing back as though everything in his world was bright. But none of that brightness reached me. I sat at the far end of the table, my chair pushed awkwardly against the wall, as if my presence were only tolerated. By the time the dishes had circled the table, by the time plates had been filled and refilled, no one remembered that I had not been served. When Daniel finally turned toward me, there was nothing left to give. Just scraps. And he gave them to me without hesitation, without the faintest recognition of what that gesture meant. I lifted my eyes for just a moment and caught Rebecca's gaze. Her smile lingered on me, but it wasn't the smile of a daughter-in-law who respected me. It was a smile sharpened by quiet cruelty, the kind of smile people wear when they enjoy seeing someone made small. She leaned toward Daniel, her voice carrying across the table with practiced lightness that cut deeper than any blade. "I told you we should have set aside less. Mom doesn't eat much, right?" She didn't even look at me as she said it. Daniel chuckled, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "She's fine." And then his eyes dropped back to the basket of bread already empty, his fingers drumming as if nothing had just passed between us. I lowered my gaze to the plate again, afraid that if I held their eyes any longer, they would see the tears threatening to pool. I forced a bite of cold potato into my mouth, but it turned heavy as stone on my tongue. Around me, voices continued to chatter about promotions at work, about Lily's school projects, about things they were buying, vacations they wanted to take. They talked and laughed, as though I weren't there at all, as though I were a shadow blending into the wallpaper. Invisible. Forgotten. The truth burned in my chest. This family table was full, but I was empty. I thought back to when Daniel was a boy, how his little face used to light up when I managed to bring home a roasted chicken, how his eyes widened at the rare sweetness of an apple pie I had baked after weeks of saving. He never knew how often I went without, so he could have more. He never saw me press a hand against my hollow stomach, whispering, "I'm not hungry," while sliding the last bite onto his plate. He never realized how many times I carried groceries home in the snow because I couldn't afford a cab just so he would have fresh fruit for his lunchbox. I had spent decades making sure my son never had to look at scraps. And now, here I was, eating them. A quiet rage began to stir within me, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that settles deep, glowing steadily like embers in ash. I did not slam the plate down. I did not demand better. I was too tired for that. Instead, I felt something harden inside me, something that whispered I was not invisible, not worthless. It told me that one day they would understand the weight of what they had done. The night stretched long. Daniel leaned back, satisfied, while Rebecca gathered the dishes, her laughter sharp as glass. Lily ran off to play, her small feet pattering down the hallway, innocent of the cruelty her grandmother had just endured. No one asked me if I had eaten enough. No one noticed the untouched food on my plate. They drifted away, leaving me alone at the far end of the table, staring at bones and scraps, staring at a truth that could no longer be ignored. Later, when I lay down in the cramped guest room at the back of their house, I pressed my eyes shut, but sleep would not come. The phrase echoed in my mind over and over, each repetition heavier than the last. That's all that's left. It was no longer about dinner. It was about my place in his life, my worth. To them, I was what was left over. Just another burden to be tolerated, a shadow in the corner. And as the darkness closed in around me, I realized with aching clarity I had become the leftovers of my own family. I couldn't sleep that night. The words, "That's all that's left," chased me into every corner of my mind. They circled like vultures, swooping low every time I thought I had pushed them away. I turned on my side, the springs of the guest bed creaking beneath me, and stared at the wall, where a thin sliver of moonlight cut through the blinds. My chest ached with the weight of memory, and I found myself wandering backward through the years, to the days when my son was small, when the world seemed so much harsher, yet somehow we were closer. I had been 24 when Daniel was born, young, terrified, and already a widow. His father had died in a car accident before Daniel even opened his eyes to this world. I remember standing in the hospital, cradling a bundle so tiny that I was afraid to breathe too loudly lest I break him. My hands shook, but in that fragile body I found a purpose strong enough to silence every fear. I told myself that I would give him everything I could, even if it meant I had to go without. And I did. The first few years were the hardest. I worked as a substitute teacher by day and graded papers at night, often with Daniel asleep on my lap. There were nights when I boiled rice with only salt because my paycheck wouldn't stretch far enough for meat. He would look up at me with big brown eyes and smile, chewing happily, never knowing how many meals I skipped to make sure he had enough. I still remember the sharp hunger that clawed at my stomach as I watched him eat. That hunger never mattered because he was full, and that was all that counted. Winters were brutal in those years. I remember one in particular when the pipes froze in our tiny apartment. The heater sputtered and died, and I wrapped Daniel in 2 layers of coats, tucking him beside me on the mattress we shared, blowing warm air onto his little fingers while I pretended I wasn't freezing myself. His laughter, his trust, his innocent belief that I could protect him from anything, those things became my fuel. He was my reason for rising at dawn, my reason for fighting through exhaustion, my reason for breathing. I remember the first Christmas after his father died. Money was so tight I couldn't afford a tree, much less gifts. But I cut branches from outside, arranged them in a bucket, and decorated them with strings of popcorn we made together. I sewed him a stuffed bear out of scraps of fabric, stitching it by hand under the dim kitchen light. His face lit up as if I had given him the world. That bear stayed with him for years. He would take it to bed, tuck it under his arm at night. Sometimes I would peek into his room and find him whispering secrets to it, and my heart would swell with pride that he was still safe enough to dream, still innocent enough to believe in magic. When he started school, I worked double shifts to make sure he had new shoes for the first day. They weren't anything fancy, just plain sneakers, but I'll never forget how he ran through the schoolyard, beaming, shouting, "Look, Mom, I can run so fast now." I clapped from the sidelines, tears stinging my eyes. Every accomplishment of his felt like a victory over the cruel world that had tried to strip us bare. And yet, there were darker moments too. The evenings when I came home too tired to speak, when he sat quietly at the table doing his homework by the dim light of a single lamp. The mornings I left him with neighbors because I had to cover a class at the last minute. The guilt ate at me, constantly whispering that I wasn't enough, that he deserved more than a mother always stretched too thin. But Daniel never complained. He would hug me, press his warm cheek against mine, and say, "Don't worry, Mom, you're the best." Those words were the balm that kept me alive. The years flew by, and my sacrifices only grew. I turned down chances to remarry because I couldn't bear the thought of splitting my attention, of letting any man dictate how my son should be raised. Friends told me I was too soft, that I spoiled him, but I didn't care. He was all I had. When college came, I drained every bit of savings, took out small loans, sold the few pieces of jewelry my mother had left me, just so Daniel could go to the school he dreamed of. I ate instant noodles for months while sending him grocery money, telling him I had everything I needed back home. I wanted him to feel proud when he walked through campus, not weighed down by the shame of poverty. And I still remember the look on his face at graduation. His cap slightly askew, his eyes searching the crowd until they landed on me. He waved his grin wide enough to split the sky. In that moment, I thought every sacrifice had been worth it. I thought he understood. I thought he knew. But lying there in the small guest bed of his house, staring at that sliver of moonlight, I realized how naive I had been. Because somewhere between those days of rice and salt, those winters of frozen pipes, and the Christmas with the makeshift tree, my son had forgotten. Forgotten what it meant to be cared for, forgotten the weight of my sacrifices. And now all I was to him was someone to be tolerated at the corner of his table, served scraps when everyone else had eaten their fill. The more I thought about it, the more the pain twisted inside me, not just sorrow, but betrayal. Betrayal that the boy who once clung to my hand at night now handed me cold potatoes without a second thought. Betrayal that the young man I had cheered for, sacrificed for, prayed for now couldn't even spare me the dignity of a warm meal. I closed my eyes, but there was no rest. Only the past replaying itself, the sound of Daniel's laughter as a boy, overlapping with the sharp echo of his words as a man. That's all that's left. And I couldn't help but wonder, was that really all I was to him now? The days after that dinner blurred together in a fog of silence. I woke early, not because I had anything to do, but because old habits die hard. Decades of rising at dawn to prepare for work had set a rhythm in my bones, and even in retirement I could not sleep in. I padded quietly into the kitchen, my slippers scuffing against the polished hardwood floor, but each morning I found Rebecca already there, humming softly as she packed Lily's lunch. The counter crowded with neat containers. She would glance at me, her eyes flicking with something sharp before returning to her task. "Oh, you're up." That was usually all she said. I wanted to help peel fruit, butter, bread, anything, but Rebecca always angled her body between me and the counter, as though my presence disrupted the order of her morning. Once I reached for a knife to slice apples, and she stepped in with a tight smile. "Don't worry, I've got it. Just sit down, Maggie." I obeyed, lowering myself into the chair at the end of the island, feeling like a ghost haunting the edges of their life. Daniel would rush in a few minutes later, shirt half-buttoned, tie dangling. He kissed Lily's head, pecked Rebecca's cheek, grabbed his coffee, and offered me only a distracted morning mom without ever meeting my eyes. He didn't notice the way my hands lingered on the mug I held, desperate for some kind of warmth. He didn't notice that I sometimes wanted to tell him how proud I was of him, how the little boy who once clung to my leg had become this tall man, but there was no space for those words here. The house was beautiful, larger than anything I had ever known, with shining appliances and photographs perfectly framed on every wall. Yet inside it, I felt small, misplaced like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong box. My room was at the far end of the hallway, the smallest space where the walls were bare and the bed stiff. Rebecca had said it would be cozier for me, but what it felt like was a quiet corner where I could be tucked away unseen. Meals became the worst part of my days. Breakfast was quick and hurried lunch often skipped, but dinner was where the gulf between us grew wide. The table was lively with conversation, Daniel talking about work, Rebecca about her friends, Lily about school. But their words skimmed past me like pebbles skipping across water. Sometimes I tried to join in telling a story from my years as a teacher, but Rebecca's polite nods and Daniel's distracted glances silenced me. My words fell flat, unneeded like decorations out of season. I learned to eat quietly, to fold my napkin neatly, and place my fork down before anyone noticed how little I'd touched. I learned to excuse myself early, retreating to my room with the excuse of being tired. Behind the closed door, I would sit on the edge of the bed and listen to their laughter continue without me, muffled but steady, and I would press my hand to my chest to calm the ache inside. One afternoon, I walked into the living room while Rebecca was on the phone. She didn't hear me at first, her voice sharp and annoyed. Yes, she's still here. I don't know how much longer. It's like having a shadow around all the time. My feet froze on the carpet. When she saw me, she covered the phone quickly and forced a smile. "Oh, Maggie, I didn't see you there. Just talking to a friend." But the words had already cut through me, leaving a wound that no smile could hide. It was in those moments I realized how unwelcome I truly was. I had told myself I was part of this family, that living here meant I was safe, cared for. But in reality, I was a guest, overstaying her welcome, tolerated rather than loved. I began to move more quietly to take up less space. I washed my own dishes separately, folded my laundry before anyone could notice, slipped into bed earlier so my presence wouldn't intrude. And yet, no matter how careful I became, the distance only grew. Daniel worked longer hours. Rebecca filled her calendar with social gatherings, and Lily, sweet Lily, was too young to understand why Grandma always seemed sad. Sometimes she would run to me with a drawing or a story, and for a few moments I felt alive again. But then Rebecca's voice would call her away, and I would be left clutching at the fading echo of a child's laughter, the last fragile thread connecting me to a sense of belonging. One night, as I lay in bed, I asked myself a question I never thought I would have. I become invisible to my own son. I remembered the boy who once cried if I left the room too long, who used to slip his small hand into mine and refuse to let go. Now that same boy sat across from me at dinner and looked right through me as though I were a stranger passing by. The loneliness pressed in like a second skin. I felt it in the silence of the guest room, in the way my footsteps echoed down empty hallways, in the scraps left on my plate. I felt it in the way Rebecca's eyes slid over me, in the way Daniel's voice never softened when he spoke to me. And I realized that the house was not a home for me. It was simply a place where I existed, unseen, unheard, like a forgotten piece of furniture gathering dust in the corner. Have you ever been in a situation like this? If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that should have been filled with peace. The air smelled faintly of roasted chicken again, and I was standing at the kitchen sink, sleeves rolled to my elbows, rinsing the last of the plates. Old habits are hard to break. I had spent decades washing dishes after meals, and, though my body was slower now, I still found comfort in the familiar rhythm of water and soap. But Rebecca's heels clicked sharply against the floor as she entered, and her voice, flat, almost annoyed, broke the quiet. "Maggie, you really don't need to do that. The dishwasher works fine." I turned my head, trying to smile. "I don't mind. My hands like to stay busy." Her eyes' narrowed lips pursed in a way that made her look less like a young wife and more like a warden surveying an unwanted guest. She leaned against the counter, arms folded. It's not that. It just makes things awkward. You don't have to keep trying to help. We can manage. The words hit harder than she probably expected. Awkward. Was that what I was? My presence, my gestures, my attempt to belong awkward. Before I could reply, Daniel walked in, loosening his tie, looking tired but calm. "What's going on?" he asked, glancing between us. Rebecca didn't hesitate. "Your mom keeps insisting on doing the dishes. I told her it's unnecessary. Honestly, it feels like I have to supervise everything now." The sting sharpened when Daniel didn't defend me. He just sighed and rubbed his temples. "Mom, maybe just let it be. Rebecca's right. We have it handled." I dried my hands quietly on a towel, swallowing the knot rising in my throat. "Of course," I murmured. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." But Rebecca wasn't finished. She pushed off the counter, stepping closer, her voice carrying a sharper edge now that Daniel was in the room. "It's not just the dishes, Maggie. It's everything. You're always here hovering. I know you're trying, but it's hard to keep a balance when there's another person in the house who doesn't quite fit." Her words cut like glass. Doesn't quite fit. As though I were a misshapen puzzle piece jammed into their perfect picture. I looked at Daniel, praying he would say something, anything to soften the blow. But he only stood there silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. I felt myself shrink. My shoulders curled in as though I could fold myself small enough to disappear. I whispered, "I'm sorry," though I had no idea what crime I was apologizing for other than existing. Rebecca turned away, satisfied as if she had won some small victory. "We'll all be happier if you just take it easy," she said, her tone light, but her meaning heavy as iron. Then she left the kitchen, her perfume lingering in the air long after her footsteps faded. Daniel lingered a moment longer, but he didn't meet my eyes. He mumbled something about needing to check emails, then disappeared too, leaving me standing alone by the sink. My reflection wavered in the steel faucet, and I hardly recognized the woman staring back. Cheeks hollow, eyes, dull shoulders bent as though bearing a weight that could not be seen. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the suitcase tucked beneath it. I had brought so little with me when I moved here, a few clothes, some books, a photo album. I told myself then that it was enough, that I wouldn't need more because I'd be with family. But Rebecca's words replayed in my head over and over, "You don't quite fit." The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that I was no longer a mother in this house. I was a lodger who had overstayed her welcome, a shadow in the kitchen, a ghost at the dinner table. The next morning, as I poured myself a cup of coffee, Rebecca walked in with Lily. She greeted her daughter with a warm kiss, ruffled her hair, then turned to me with a politeness so brittle it could break at any second. "Good morning, Maggie," she said. Her smile was thin, her tone sharper than the knife lying on the counter. "I'll take care of breakfast today. Why don't you—" "Sit down," I obeyed, sitting quietly at the table watching as she spread jam on toast and poured cereal into bowls. She moved with ease, her every gesture smooth, efficient. She belonged here. And I simply watched, my hands folded in my lap, my chest tight with the unspoken truth that I no longer belonged anywhere. Later that day, while Daniel was at work and Lily at school, Rebecca approached me in the hallway. Her voice was low, but her eyes gleamed with a bluntness she no longer cared to hide. "Maggie, I know Daniel feels guilty saying this, so I'll just be honest. This house, it's ours. You being here changes everything. We don't have the space or the energy to keep adjusting. I think you'd be happier if you had your own place." The words rang in my ears like a sentence passed down in a courtroom. Happier if you had your own place. As though she were offering me kindness when really she was casting me out. I felt the air leave my lungs, but I managed to whisper, "This is my son's home too." Her smile turned cold. Yes, his home. With me. With our daughter. That's the family now. For a long moment we stared at each other, two women bound to the same man by blood and marriage, locked in a silent battle neither of us would admit aloud. In her eyes I saw no respect, no empathy, only a determination to erase me from the picture she had painted for herself. I retreated to my room, closing the door softly, and sat on the bed, with my hands pressed over my face. I thought of every sacrifice, every cold winter night, every empty stomach I had endured for Daniel. And now this was what I had become, a burden his wife wanted gone, a shadow she was trying to sweep out the door. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if Daniel would let her. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, I lay awake again, my body heavy with fatigue, but my mind restless. Rebecca's words still stung in my ears. This is our family now. I felt like a thread snipped from the fabric I had worked my whole life to weave. To silence the ache in my chest, I closed my eyes and let my mind wander backward, back to the days when the table was mine, when laughter and warmth filled every corner of our small home. I remembered our little kitchen in the apartment we used to rent. The walls were yellowed with age, the linoleum floor cracked, but to me, it was a kingdom. I could still see Daniel sitting cross-legged on the floor as a boy, banging on pots with wooden spoons while I cooked. The smell of stew would fill the air, simple food, potatoes, and carrots simmered with a cheap cut of beef, but his eyes would light up as though it were a feast fit for kings. "Is it ready yet, Mom?" he'd ask, peering into the pot with eager eyes. And when I finally ladled it into bowls, he'd blow on each spoonful before slurping it down, grinning through the steam. There was a time when I made pancakes for dinner because we didn't have anything else. Flour, eggs, and a bit of milk. It was all I had left that week. But Daniel thought it was the best meal in the world. He clapped his hands, syrup dripping from his chin, and declared, "Mom, you're the greatest cook ever." His joy was infectious. I laughed so hard I forgot the worry gnawing at me about how we would make rent. For him, even the smallest effort was love. On birthdays, I tried to make things special. I couldn't afford expensive cakes, so I baked simple ones from scratch, sometimes with frosting made only from powdered sugar and milk. Daniel never seemed to mind. He would blow out the candles, close his eyes tight, and whisper wishes he never told me. And then he'd hug me, saying, "Thanks, Mom, it's perfect." For those brief moments, I felt rich. Even holidays carried their own magic. Christmas in that apartment when we had so little still glows in my memory like a warm fire. I made decorations out of colored paper, strung popcorn with a needle, and hung them carefully across the room. Daniel would dance around singing carols out of tune, and I'd laugh until tears rolled down my cheeks. We had no money, no grandeur, but what we had was each other. Every bite we shared, every song we sang, every story told at the table reminded me that love could be enough. As he grew older, those meals became less about food and more about connection. He would tell me about his day at school, the kids he liked, the teachers he hated. He'd sit at the table, chin resting on his hands, and ask questions about the world. Why the sky changed colors, why people were cruel, why his father had to die so soon. I didn't always have the answers, but I always listened. And every night, no matter how tired I was, I made sure we ate together. Because food wasn't just about filling our stomachs, it was about reminding him that he wasn't alone. I can still recall the night he graduated high school. I had worked extra hours to afford a nice dinner at home, steak, roasted vegetables, even a store-bought pie. Daniel walked in wearing his cap and gown, and I nearly burst with pride. At the table, I raised my glass of water because I couldn't afford wine and told him how proud I was. He laughed, embarrassed, but his eyes shone with something tender. He hugged me so tight that night I could barely breathe. So how had we come to this? How had the boy who once danced around my kitchen, who once clung to me at the table, turned into the man who handed me scraps without a second thought. The contrast gnawed at me like hunger I could never satisfy. The table that had once been our altar of love had become my place of humiliation. I turned my head on the pillow, staring into the dark. My chest ached, not just from what I'd lost, but from the cruel irony of it all. I had poured my love into every meal, every plate, every moment. And now, in return, I was given cold leftovers, the symbol of my invisibility in this house. The next evening, I tried to sit at dinner with a smile, but the silence around me grew heavier. Rebecca dominated the conversation. Daniel nodded along. Lily giggled at her parents' stories. I picked at my food quietly, forcing myself to chew, but inside, I was choking on memories. I wanted to scream. Do you remember? Do you remember how we used to laugh? How I used to make even the simplest meals feel like a celebration? Do you remember who I was to you? But I stayed silent. My words swallowed like stones in my throat. When the meal ended, I lingered at the table after they left, staring at the empty plates. My hand brushed against the wood, remembering the rough surface of our old table in the apartment, worn down by years of use but filled with love. This one, polished and perfect, reflected only my loneliness back at me. I rose slowly, my knees stiff, and retreated to my room once again. The walls seemed closer each night, pressing in around me, suffocating me with silence. But even in that silence, I could still hear echoes of the past, Daniel's laughter, his voice telling me I was the best cook ever, his hugs at the end of long days. Those echoes both comforted and tormented me because they reminded me of what had been lost. And for the first time, I began to wonder if maybe I wasn't just invisible here. Maybe I had been erased. The house always gleamed with order, as if Rebecca had polished away every imperfection, every sign of life. But sometimes perfection is brittle, and one evening I stumbled upon proof of just how fragile it all really was. I was dusting in the living room, something I had started doing quietly in the afternoons when no one was around. It wasn't expected of me. Truthfully, I don't think Rebecca wanted me touching anything, but it gave me a sense of purpose. My hands, used to decades of working, felt restless when idle. The living room smelled faintly of lemon polish, the air cool from the constant hum of the air conditioner. The shelves were lined with frames, photos of Daniel and Rebecca on vacations, Lily's school portraits, family gatherings where I stood at the edge of the group, smiling faintly while the rest leaned in toward each other. As I reached for one frame, my hand slipped. It tumbled from the shelf, landing face down on the floor. The glass cracked with a sharp sound that seemed to echo through the room. My heart lurched. I bent down quickly, my fingers trembling as I turned it over. The photograph stared back at me through a jagged web of broken glass. It was Daniel's wedding day. He stood tall in his suit, Rebecca radiant beside him, Lily just a baby in her arms. And me, there I was off to the side, smile, frozen eyes glistening with pride. The crack in the glass cut right across my face, slicing me out of the picture, as if fate itself had drawn a line through me. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Something about that broken frame felt like truth made visible. The picture-perfect family had never really included me. Even when I stood beside them, I was off to the side, a shadow at the edge of their joy. Now, with the glass shattered, my place in the family seemed even more fractured, as though the universe had confirmed what my heart already knew: I didn't belong. I tried to fix it carefully, picking at the shards, but the edges bit into my fingertips. Tiny drops of blood welled up red against the pale glass. I sucked in a breath, clutching my hand, and suddenly the weight of it all came crashing down: the dinners of silence, Rebecca's sharp words, Daniel's indifference. Each shard glittered like a memory, painful and sharp, impossible to piece back together. Mom, Daniel's voice startled me. He stood at the doorway, briefcase in hand, his tie loosened. His eyes flicked to the broken frame in my lap. What happened? I swallowed, holding the picture gingerly. I was just dusting. It slipped. He sighed, stepping closer. You should have left it. You don't need to worry about cleaning. We have everything handled. The words were meant lightly, but they struck deep. We have everything handled. Once again, I was reminded that I wasn't needed, not even for the smallest task. He reached down, took the frame from me, and set it aside without even looking at the blood on my fingers. I'll get Rebecca to order a new frame, he muttered, already moving toward the kitchen. I sat frozen, my hand throbbing, my heart heavier than ever. He hadn't even noticed the crack that cut across my face, hadn't seen how symbolic it was, how much it hurt. To him, it was just a broken frame. To me, it was my entire place in his life, fractured beyond repair. That night, I couldn't shake the image. Lying in bed, I closed my eyes and saw the splintered glass, my own reflection, scattered into pieces. It was as if life itself was telling me I had been erased, reduced to fragments no one cared to put back together. The next morning, when I came into the living room, the photo was gone. The shelf looked bare, the space too neat, too empty. Rebecca passed by with a cup of coffee, her expression unreadable. "Oh, that old picture," I told Daniel it was time to replace it. "We'll get a new one." But the way she said it, so casual, so dismissive, made my stomach twist. A new one. One without me in it, perhaps. A perfect frame for their perfect family without the crack that reminded them of my presence, without the face that no longer belonged. I sat on the couch after she left, staring at the empty space where the photo had been. My fingers still bore faint red marks from where the glass had cut me, and I couldn't help but think maybe it was never an accident. Maybe the universe had simply revealed the truth that I was already broken, already removed from their picture. From that day forward, I stopped dusting. I stopped touching their things, stopped trying to insert myself into their world. I moved more quietly through the house, careful not to leave traces of myself. Because deep down, I knew, no matter how much I tried to mend it, the frame of this family had already been shattered, and I was the piece they had decided to leave out. It happened on a night when sleep refused to come. The house was silent except for the steady hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of wood as it settled. I had been lying in bed staring at the ceiling when I heard muffled voices drifting from down the hall. At first, I thought it was the television, but then I recognized Daniel's low tone, followed by Rebecca's sharper, faster voice. I rose quietly, slipping into my slippers. The floor was cold beneath my feet as I moved closer to the living room. Their voices grew clearer, weaving through the darkness. I stopped just short of the doorway, heart pounding, and pressed my back against the wall. "We can't keep doing this," Daniel, Rebecca was saying, her tone clipped, almost impatient. "It's been months. She's here every day, in every corner of this house. I can't breathe with her shadow hanging over everything." My breath caught the sting of her words, piercing me like icy needles. Daniel sighed heavily. "She's my mother, Rebecca. What do you expect me to do? Throw her out on the street?" "You're exaggerating," she snapped back. "No one's saying we should throw her on the street. But she's not our responsibility anymore. She's perfectly capable of living on her own. And honestly, Daniel, it's affecting us. You don't see it, but I do." The tension, the way Lily looks confused when your mom sits in silence at the table. This isn't healthy for anyone. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to steady the thundering rhythm of my heart. Not our responsibility anymore. Was that what I was to them? A duty they no longer wished to carry. Daniel's voice came again, softer this time, almost hesitant. "I know it's hard, but she doesn't really have anywhere else to go. I can't tell her to leave. Not yet." Rebecca let out a short, bitter laugh. "Not yet. So we wait until when? Until she's completely settled in here, until she's impossible to move. No, Daniel. We need to set boundaries now. This is our home. Our life. And right now she's in the middle of it. Every time I walk into the kitchen, she's there. Every time we try to have dinner, she's hovering. And you don't even notice because you're used to it. But I'm not. I want a home with you, not with your mother. The words sliced through the air, deliberate and cruel. I felt my knees weaken and I leaned harder against the wall, my breath shallow. Daniel's silence was worse than any argument. He didn't defend me. He didn't remind her of the years I had raised him alone, of the sacrifices I had made. Finally, he muttered, "I'll talk to her. Maybe we can find another arrangement." Another arrangement. Those two words settled like stones in my stomach. I slipped back down the hall before I could hear more, my body trembling as though the ground beneath me had shifted. In my room, I sat on the bed, my hands gripping the edge of the mattress. My chest rose and fell with sharp, uneven breaths. So it was true. The broken frame hadn't been just a symbol, it had been a warning. I didn't belong here. I wasn't wanted here. And now they were planning how to rid themselves of me. I thought back to all the times I had tried to be useful. Folding laundry, washing dishes, sweeping floors. Every gesture had been an attempt to repay them for letting me stay. But in their eyes, it wasn't gratitude, it was intrusion. A flood of memories rushed through me. Daniel as a boy, holding my hand tightly when crossing the street. Daniel crying when he scraped his knee, trusting me to make it better with a kiss and a bandage. Daniel at graduation hugging me so hard I thought my ribs would break. That same boy was now a man standing silently while his wife spoke of me as though I were a nuisance to be managed. The betrayal was almost too much to bear. My heart ached with a mixture of sorrow and rage, emotions so tangled I couldn't separate them. I pressed my face into my hands, and for the first time since moving into their house, I let myself cry, quiet, stifled sobs that shook my whole body. But even through the tears, a seed of resolve began to grow. If they wanted me gone, if they saw me as nothing but a shadow in their perfect life, then perhaps it was time to give them exactly what they wanted. Not as a defeat, but as a choice of my own. I would not wait for Daniel to sit me down and gently suggest another arrangement. I would not endure Rebecca's cold smiles and sharp words any longer. I wiped my tears and sat upright, staring at the suitcase beneath my bed. My fingers itched to pull it out, to start folding my clothes to prepare for the departure I knew was coming. But I forced myself to wait, to breathe, to think. Leaving would not be just an act of surrender, it would be an act of survival. A way to reclaim some fragment of dignity in a house where I had none left. That night, as I finally drifted into restless sleep, Rebecca's words replayed in my ears, mingling with Daniel's silence. "She's not our responsibility anymore." Another arrangement. And I knew then that my days in this house were numbered. I woke before dawn the next morning, long before the rest of the house stirred. The air was heavy with that peculiar stillness that comes before sunrise, when shadows cling to the walls and silence weighs down on every sound. I sat at the edge of the bed for a long while, staring at the suitcase tucked beneath it. My chest tightened as I thought of the conversation I had overheard, Rebecca's sharp tone, Daniel's silence, the words, "another arrangement." I couldn't wait for them to push me out. If I stayed, the humiliation would be greater. No, I needed to leave on my own terms, quietly, without confrontation, while I still had the strength to hold my head up. I bent down and pulled out the suitcase. The wheels scraped softly against the floor, a sound that seemed deafening in the stillness of the house. I unzipped it and began to fold my clothes, moving slowly, carefully, as though each fabric carried a memory. A worn cardigan Daniel had given me years ago for Christmas, back when he still thought of me with affection. A faded scarf I used to wear when walking him to school on cold mornings. Each piece felt like a chapter of my life, and packing them away felt like closing the book. I paused at the dresser, my hand hovering over the photo album I had carried with me. Inside were pictures of Daniel as a baby, a toddler, a young man, snapshots of the years when we had only each other. For a moment I considered leaving it behind, afraid that holding on would only deepen the wound. But then I thought, if I don't take these memories, who will? so I placed the album carefully on top of the clothes and zipped the suitcase shut. The sound of the zipper seemed to echo through the room like a final verdict. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the handle, lifting the suitcase upright. It felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried not just fabric and paper, but decades of sacrifice, love, and disappointment. I moved quietly down the hallway, my slippers brushing against the floor. Lily's door was ajar, and I caught a glimpse of her small figure curled beneath the blankets, breathing softly in dreams. For a moment, my heart wavered. She was innocent in all of this, her smile the only light in my days here. I wanted to tiptoe inside, kiss her forehead, whisper goodbye. But I knew if I did, Rebecca might twist it later into something unwelcome, a mark against me. So I stood in the doorway, tears pricking my eyes, and whispered silently, "Goodbye, my sweet Lily. I hope you remember me kindly." In the kitchen, I paused. The table stood empty, a silent witness to the cold meals and colder silences I had endured. I ran my hand lightly over its smooth surface, remembering the laughter of my own table years ago, the warmth of meals made with love. This table, for all its polish and shine, had never welcomed me. And now, it would never have to again. I slipped on my coat, the same old one I had worn for years, and lifted the suitcase by the handle. It wobbled slightly, its wheels catching against the rug, but I steadied it and moved toward the door. The air outside was cold, sharp against my skin, carrying the scent of damp earth and early morning dew. I inhaled deeply, the chill burning my lungs, but it felt cleaner, freer than the stifling air inside the house. As I stepped onto the porch, I hesitated. My eyes drifted back to the closed door, the house where I had thought I would find comfort, where I believed family would mean belonging. Instead, it had shown me the truth that love can fade, that sacrifice can be forgotten, that sometimes the people we give everything to can turn away without a second thought. I whispered into the darkness, though no one was there to hear me. "I gave you my life, Daniel. And now, I'm giving you what you want, my absence." The suitcase bumped softly against each step as I made my way down the porch. The street was empty, the lamps still glowing faintly against the approaching dawn. I walked slowly, each step feeling both heavy and liberating. My legs trembled, my body weak, but my spirit, though cracked, felt a strange surge of resolve. I didn't know where I would go. I had no plan, no clear destination, but I knew I couldn't stay. I would rather face the uncertainty of the world than the certainty of being unwanted under my own son's roof. As the first light of morning broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pale gold and gray, I tightened my grip on the suitcase and kept walking. Behind me, the house stood silent, unaware, or perhaps uncaring that I was leaving. Ahead of me lay only questions, but also the faint, fragile promise of dignity. And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was life beyond leftovers. The city felt different when you had no place to return to. The sidewalks seemed longer, the benches harder, the faces of strangers sharper in the early morning light. I dragged my suitcase along the pavement, its wheels rattling against cracks in the cement. Every few steps I had to pause, my breath fogging in the cold air, my legs aching from the weight, not just of the suitcase, but of what it represented. I didn't know where I was going. At 64, I was too old to be wandering with a suitcase and no plan, but I couldn't go back. That much was clear. Every step away from Daniel's house was a step away from humiliation, from scraps on a plate, from being told I didn't fit. By mid-morning, I found myself in front of a small cafe tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore. The smell of fresh coffee drifted out as someone pushed the door open, and my stomach clenched with hunger. I hadn't eaten breakfast. I debated turning away, but something inside me pushed me through the door. The warmth hit me immediately, the clinking of cups, the murmur of voices. Behind the counter stood a woman about my age, her hair streaked with gray, her smile genuine. She glanced at my suitcase and then at me, but instead of the usual judgment, her eyes softened. "You look like you could use a cup of coffee," she said kindly. I hesitated. "I don't really have much money." She waved her hand dismissively. "Don't worry about it. First one's on me." Tears stung my eyes at her simple generosity. I sank into a chair near the window, and a few minutes later she brought over not just coffee, but also a toasted bagel, warm and fragrant. "You'll feel better with something in your stomach," she said. As I ate, the tightness in my chest loosened just a little. The bagel wasn't fancy, but it tasted better than anything I'd eaten in months because it was offered with kindness, not contempt. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't an inconvenience. I was simply a person worthy of being cared for, even by a stranger. The woman introduced herself as Carol. She owned the cafe with her husband, who came out from the back a few minutes later, flour dusting his apron. They chatted with me as though I had always belonged there, asking about my life without prying too deeply. Something about the way they listened, nodding, smiling, made me feel seen. When Carol noticed the suitcase at my feet, she didn't ask questions that would embarrass me. She only said, "If you need a place to rest for a while, you're welcome to sit here as long as you like. No rush." I stayed the entire afternoon, sipping slowly at the coffee, watching people come and go. No one looked at me with disdain. No one told me I was in the way. The cafe hummed with warmth, and for those hours I felt less like a burden and more like a guest who belonged. That evening, when it was time to close, Carol leaned over and said softly, "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" The question caught me off guard. My throat tightened, but I managed to shake my head. She thought for a moment, then smiled gently. "We've got a spare room above the cafe. It's small, but it's warm. You'd be doing me a favor, actually. I could use some help opening in the mornings. Just simple things, wiping tables, brewing the first pot of coffee. Nothing heavy." I stared at her, unable to believe such kindness. "Are you sure?" I whispered. "Of course. Everyone needs a fresh start sometimes." And just like that, I found myself carrying my suitcase up a narrow staircase behind the cafe. The room was modest: a single bed, a dresser, a small window that overlooked the street. But to me, it felt like sanctuary. I set my suitcase down, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the tears come freely. Not from sorrow this time, but from relief. The following morning, I woke early, as I always did. For the first time in a long time, I had something to do. I wiped down tables, arranged chairs, and even brewed coffee under Carol's patient instruction. My hands, which had felt useless in Daniel's home, now found purpose again. Customers came in, and a few even smiled at me as I served them their cups. One young woman said, "Thank you," and the words filled me with a warmth so profound I nearly wept. In those simple tasks, I rediscovered a piece of myself I thought I had lost. I wasn't just a shadow in the corner. I wasn't leftovers. I was useful. I was capable. I was alive. Each evening after closing, Carol and her husband would sit with me, sharing tea and conversation. They told me about their own struggles, how the cafe had nearly gone under during hard times, how they had rebuilt from nothing. "People need people," Carol said once, her hand brushing mine. "We get through by helping each other." Those words lodged in my heart. For so long, I had been made to feel like I was nothing but a burden. But here among strangers, I was reminded of something vital: my worth was not defined by my son's neglect or my daughter-in-law's cruelty. My worth existed simply because I was human, because I still had love and effort to give. As the days turned into weeks, I grew stronger. My back straightened, my steps steadied, my eyes brightened. Each morning when I opened the cafe doors to let in the first customers, I felt a quiet pride. This little place, with its warmth and kindness, had given me more than a roof over my head. It had given me back myself. But deep inside, a question lingered, haunting me in the quiet hours before sleep. How will Daniel and Rebecca react when they realize I'm gone? When they see the space I left behind, I didn't know the answer, but I knew this much. I was no longer waiting for their approval to feel alive. How do you think they will react when I reveal that to everyone? The cafe became my lifeline. Each morning, I opened the door with Carol, the smell of freshly ground coffee beans and baked bread filling the air like a promise. The hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of cups, the soft chatter of early customers. These sounds wrapped around me, steady and reassuring. They were a rhythm I could count on, a rhythm that reminded me I still had a place in the world. I started small, wiping tables, sweeping the floor, learning how to brew the first pot of coffee. But as days turned into weeks, Carol gently pushed me to do more. "Why don't you try taking orders?" she suggested one morning. My hands trembled as I approached the counter, but the first customer smiled and said, "Good morning," as though it were the most natural thing in the world. That tiny moment felt like a victory. I earned a little money, not much, but enough to buy things for myself without asking anyone's permission. The first time I used my wages to buy groceries, I nearly cried in the aisle of the store. I picked out fresh vegetables, meat, and a loaf of bread, all for me. Not scraps, not whatever was left behind, but real food chosen with care. Back in the little room above the cafe, I cooked my first meal alone, in years vegetable soup simmering on a small hot plate, its steam curling into the air. I sat at the tiny table by the window, a bowl of soup in my hands, and for the first time I tasted freedom. It wasn't about the food. It was about knowing I had provided it for myself. No one could belittle me. No one could hand me cold leftovers with dismissive words. Each spoonful tasted like dignity. On weekends, Carol and her husband invited me to share meals with them. We would sit together in the back of the cafe after closing, eating roast chicken or pasta while laughter filled the room. They asked me about my life, not in a way that demanded answers, but in a way that made me feel my story mattered. Sometimes Carol would squeeze my hand and say, "You've been through a lot, Maggie, but you're stronger than you realize." Her words planted something inside me. For so long, I had thought of myself as weak, as invisible, as nothing more than what my son and his wife decided I was. But here, with these kind strangers, I began to see myself differently. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't leftovers. I was a woman who had endured, who had raised a son alone, who had survived heartbreak and humiliation. I was still standing. As the weeks passed, I even began to enjoy little things I had forgotten. I bought a small potted plant and placed it on my windowsill. I started journaling in the evenings, writing down my thoughts, my memories, my quiet hopes. Sometimes I walked through the nearby park on my day off, watching children play, couples stroll, dogs chase after sticks. The world no longer seemed so hostile. It seemed alive, and slowly I began to feel alive too. One evening, as I counted the day's tips in a small envelope Carol had given me, I realized something astonishing. I had saved enough to think about a future of my own. It wasn't much, but it was more than nothing. I could pay for my own food, my own needs. I could survive without Daniel. That realization struck me like sunlight breaking through clouds. I had spent so many years believing my worth was tied to my role as his mother. But here I was, carving out a new identity, one that belonged to me alone. Still, in quiet moments, thoughts of Daniel haunted me. Did he even notice I was gone? Did Rebecca celebrate my absence? Did Lily ask where her grandmother had gone? These questions swirled in my mind, but I forced myself not to dwell. The truth was, they had wanted me gone, and I had given them what they wanted. Now I was building a life where I didn't need their approval, a life that belonged entirely to me. One afternoon, a young customer spilled her coffee at the counter. I rushed over with a towel, reassuring her with a smile. She laughed nervously, saying, "Thank you, ma'am, you're so kind." The word kind struck me deeply. It reminded me of who I was beneath the hurt, a woman whose instinct was always to care, to nurture, to give. That part of me hadn't died, even if Daniel no longer saw it. That night, as I sat by the window with my journal, I wrote a sentence that felt like a vow: I am more than what they left me with. I am more than their scraps. And I believed it. Little by little, I was piecing myself back together, not as a mother defined by her son, not as a burden shuffled from room to room, but as Maggie Turner, a woman with dignity, resilience, and her own place in the world. The question that still lingered was this: what would happen if Daniel came looking for me? What would I say if he stood at my door asking for help, asking for the mother he had discarded? A part of me longed for that moment. Another part feared it. But deep down, I knew if that day ever came, I would no longer be the same woman who accepted leftovers in silence. It was late in the evening when I first heard the knock. At first, I thought it was just the wind rattling the old frame of the cafe upstairs, but then it came again, louder, more urgent. I set aside the book I had been reading and walked slowly to the door of my little room, unease tightening in my chest. Visitors were rare. Carol and her husband were downstairs closing up, and no one ever came looking for me. The knock came a third time. I hesitated, then opened the door. And there he was, Daniel. He stood in the dim hallway, his shoulders slumped, his face pale. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion, his tie crooked, his shirt wrinkled. He looked nothing like the confident man who once brushed past me at the dinner table, too busy to notice my silence. In that moment, he looked like a boy again, the boy I used to hold when he cried, the boy who once clung to my hand. Mom. His voice cracked on the word. I gripped the doorframe, my breath caught between anger and instinct. Daniel? What are you doing here? He swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the floor. I didn't know where else to go. I stared at him, stunned. What about your home, Rebecca Lilly? He flinched at their names. Rebecca left. She took Lily with her. She said she was tired of everything. The house, the arguments, me. His voice broke raw and trembling. I thought I was doing everything right, Mom. Working, providing. But somewhere along the way, it all fell apart. I lost them. I lost everything. I stood frozen, emotions crashing into each other, shock, sorrow, bitterness. After all this time, after all the nights I cried in silence because of his neglect here, he was broken and begging at my door. Why are you here, Daniel? My voice was steadier than I felt. You made it very clear once that I didn't fit into your life. His eyes finally met mine, brimming with tears. I was wrong. I let her words blind me. I didn't protect you. I didn't treat you the way a son should. And now he stopped, his voice strangled with shame. Now I see what I've done. I see it too late. For a moment I saw the boy he had been, the boy who once cried when he thought I was angry with him. My heart twisted painfully, but I forced myself to stay still. You hurt me, Daniel. Do you understand that you let me sit at your table and eat scraps? You let her speak to me as though I were nothing. You forgot every sacrifice I made for you. Tears rolled down his cheeks. He stepped closer, almost reaching for me, but stopping short. I know, and I'll never forgive myself for it. But please, Mom, please don't turn me away. I have nowhere else to go. The silence between us stretched long. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the clink of dishes as Carol and her husband closed up shop. My heart wavered. Every instinct in me screamed to comfort him, to take him in, to be the mother I had always been. But another voice, the voice forged in pain, in humiliation, whispered, "Do not forget. Do not let him erase what he did." Finally, I stepped aside. Come in. Daniel exhaled a shaky breath, relief washing over his face as he stepped into my small room. He looked around, eyes scanning the simple bed, the dresser, the little plant on the windowsill. This is where you've been. His voice was hushed, almost guilty. Yes, I said simply. Here among strangers who showed me more kindness than my own son did. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, his hands covering his face. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then, muffled through his palms, he whispered, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need your help. I don't know how to put my life back together. I watched him, my chest tight. This was the moment I had once imagined in my bitterness, that he would come to me broken begging, and I would have the power to choose. And now that it was here, it didn't feel like victory. It felt heavy, complicated, lined with both sorrow and vindication. I pulled out the chair from my little table and sat across from him. Daniel, I need you to understand something. I am not the same woman who sat at your table in silence. I am not the leftovers you once gave me. I found myself again here. I am strong now, stronger than I was. If you want me in your life, you will have to respect that. He lifted his head, eyes red but earnest. I will, Mom. I promise. I'll do anything to make it right. I studied him, searching for the truth in his words. Part of me wanted to believe him, to embrace him, to heal the wound between us. Another part whispered caution, reminding me how easy promises can be made when desperation takes hold. Still, I couldn't ignore the sight of him, my son, broken, reaching out for me not with arrogance, but with humility. My heart softened, though the ache of betrayal lingered. Then prove it, I said quietly. Not with words, with actions. He nodded vigorously, wiping his tears. I will. You'll see. As he sat there, shoulders shaking, I felt the strange weight of roles reversing. For so long I had been the one holding him together. Now he was the one shattered, looking to me for strength. And though I wasn't sure what would come next, I knew this much. I would no longer allow myself to be invisible. This time, the table would turn. The next morning, when I came downstairs to the cafe, Carol immediately noticed the heaviness in my face. Daniel was still asleep upstairs, sprawled on my bed, as if the weight of his failures had crushed him through the night. Carol, ever perceptive, asked nothing. She simply poured me a cup of coffee and said softly, sometimes the only way people learn is when life hands them back the same plate they once served to others. Her words settled in my mind like a seed. That afternoon, after finishing my shift, I returned to my room and began preparing a small meal. Nothing fancy, just some bread. I had set aside a bit of cold soup from the night before, and leftover scraps of vegetables I had chopped earlier in the cafe kitchen. I arranged it all on a chipped plate, the irony not lost on me. It was the very image of what I had been given in Daniel's house, the meal of someone forgotten, someone unworthy of more. When Daniel finally stirred awake, rubbing his eyes, his face worn and unshaven, I gestured to the little table. Sit, I said. He obeyed without question, lowering himself onto the chair. His eyes flicked to the plate, confusion crossing his face. What's this dinner? I replied evenly. He hesitated, then reached for the bread. It was dry edges, stiff, nothing like the warm loaves Rebecca used to set before him. He chewed slowly, his expression tightening with each bite. He moved to the soup next, tasting it, then pausing as though he couldn't quite swallow. It's cold, he murmured. I leaned forward, my voice quiet but firm. That's all that's left. The words struck him like a physical blow. He froze, the spoon hovering in his hand. Slowly his gaze lifted to meet mine, and in his eyes I saw the dawning recognition. The memory of that night when he had handed me scraps without thought flashed between us like lightning. His hand trembled and he set the spoon down, unable to continue. Mom. His voice cracked. I didn't understand. I never thought. No, you didn't. I cut in, my tone sharper than I had ever dared with him before. You never thought about what it meant to sit at a table and be given what no one else wanted. To swallow cold food while laughter and warmth passed you by. to feel invisible, discarded, unworthy. That night, Daniel, you broke something in me that I can never fully repair. Tears pooled in his eyes, spilling down his cheeks unchecked. I was blind. I thought. I thought you were strong enough that you didn't mind. I let Rebecca decide how things should be. I was a coward. And now his voice cracked raw with shame. Now I see. Too late. I folded my hands on the table, steady despite the storm inside me. It's not too late to understand. But understanding comes with a price. You need to feel the weight of what you did. You need to taste it, Daniel, until you never forget. He bowed his head, shoulders shaking. The sight of him like that, broken, humbled, stirred something deep in me. For so long I had dreamed of this moment, imagined revenge as sweet, imagined satisfaction in watching him suffer as I had. But now that it was here, the reality was different. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like sorrow too, a sorrow too deep to name. I rose from my chair and moved toward the window, looking out at the street below. People walked by carrying their own burdens, their own stories. Life went on indifferent to our pain. Behind me, Daniel wept quietly, his sobs muffled against his hands. "Mom," he whispered finally, his voice hoarse. "Will you ever forgive me?" I closed my eyes. The question cut through me. Part of me longed to answer yes, to fold him into my arms as I had when he was a boy. Another part whispered that forgiveness could not erase what had been done. Forgiveness could not erase years of invisibility, the humiliation of being unwanted. I turned back to him slowly. Forgiveness isn't given in a single word, Daniel. It's earned. Day by day. Action by action. And even then it may never feel complete. He nodded, his face streaked with tears. Then let me try. Please. Let me try to earn it. I studied him in silence, weighing his words, his brokenness, his plea. And though my heart ached with the memory of pain, I felt something shift within me. Perhaps it wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was the beginning of something different. A recognition that maybe he could learn. I walked over, placed my hand gently on his shoulder, and said quietly, "Then start by remembering this meal. Remember how it felt. And never let me or anyone else feel like leftovers again." He nodded again, his head bowed, and I knew he understood. For the first time in years, the power was in my hands, and I would never again let it slip away. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm. Daniel stayed in my small room above the cafe, moving like a ghost. He helped around the shop sometimes, washing dishes, sweeping floors, doing whatever Carol and her husband asked. I could see the awkwardness in him, a man who had once carried himself with authority, now humbled by simple tasks. But he did them quietly, without complaint, and that humility was the first proof I needed that something inside him had changed. At night, we would sit together at the small table, the same table where I had once served him the cold leftovers to mirror his cruelty. He still looked ashamed each time his eyes landed on the chipped plate, as if the memory of that moment clung to him like a brand, and I wanted it to. He needed to remember not to punish him endlessly, but to remind him of the consequences of thoughtlessness, of cruelty disguised as neglect. One evening, he broke the silence. "Mom, I don't know if I can fix everything. I don't know if Rebecca will ever come back or if Lily will forgive me, but I want to make things right with you, even if it takes the rest of my life." I listened quietly, my hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. His voice carried no arrogance, now, no dismissiveness, only raw honesty. I thought of the boy he had once been, the man he had become, and the fracture between them. I thought of the nights I had gone hungry so he could eat, the years of sacrifice, the humiliation of that plate of scraps. And then I thought of the kindness of strangers, the coffee Carol had handed me without judgment, the room they had offered without hesitation. Strangers had given me dignity when my own son had not. That contrast would forever remain etched in my heart. But I also knew this. I couldn't spend the rest of my life clinging to bitterness. I had to decide whether to let the wound define me or to let it heal, scarred but stronger. I set the cup down and met his eyes. Daniel, I can't erase what happened. I can't pretend I wasn't hurt because I was more deeply than you will ever fully understand. But I also can't spend the rest of my days carrying that pain like a weight. I need peace. And if you're truly willing to try, then maybe, just maybe, we can find a way forward. Tears welled in his eyes, and for the first time in years, I saw gratitude there. Real gratitude. He reached across the table hesitantly, as though afraid I might pull away. I let his hand rest on mine, and though my heart still carried scars, I felt a quiet release inside me. The following week, he found a small apartment nearby and began working odd jobs. He came to the cafe every day not to lean on me, but to show me through actions that he was changing. He asked questions about my past, really listened when I answered. For once, he wanted to know me not just as his mother, but as a woman who had lived, struggled, endured. And slowly, something fragile began to rebuild. Not the blind devotion I had once given him, not the illusion of a perfect family, but something real, something grounded in truth, in scars, in second chances. One night, as I lay in bed, I thought of that plate of leftovers. It had once felt like the cruelest betrayal, but now I realized it had also been a turning point. Because from that moment on, I had learned a painful, necessary truth. My worth was not defined by what anyone else placed before me. My worth was mine alone, carried in every sacrifice, every act of love, every step I took toward reclaiming myself. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I felt something like peace. If there is one thing I have learned from this journey, it is that dignity is not something others can grant us. It is something we must claim for ourselves. I was invisible in my own son's home, treated as an afterthought, handed scraps as though I were no longer worthy of respect. For a long time, I believed that treatment defined me. I believed I was what they made me feel, leftovers. But when I walked away, when I found kindness in strangers, when I began to rebuild my life with my own hands, I discovered that I had never truly lost my worth. It had been buried, hidden beneath years of sacrifice and silence, but it was always there, waiting for me to remember. Daniel came back to me broken, and in his brokenness, I saw the chance for both of us to change. He could learn, and I could heal. Forgiveness is not easy, and it may never be complete. But I no longer live for scraps of love. I live for the knowledge that I survived, that I endured, and that I chose to rise. So if you have ever felt invisible, if you have ever been made to feel like what you had to give was all that's left, let my story remind you, you are not leftovers. You are the main course of your own life, and you have the power to claim your place at the table again. Trust me, don't forget this story. And if you have lived something like this, share it in the comments. Maybe your words will be the light someone else needs. And don't forget to subscribe to Grace's Truth, for there are always more stories of survival, betrayal, and the strength to rise again.